We can all tell that things are going pretty wrong politically, economically, all over the world. But even though many of us have deeply held convictions, and many of us may be quite smart, there are a lot of contradictory, confusing, statements and ideas bandied around about what's actually, going on again, and a lot of stupid things. So I will give you today a very simple tool that shows you quite simply, what's going on in the world, and it's something I picked up by reading Aristotle. And Aristotle is a politics and also his ethics, and it's really as powerful as it is simple, and it all has to do with like methodology and a grid. Okay, so first of all, the trick here is to understand the main difference between Plato and Aristotle, who obviously are the two most famous philosophers of ancient Greece, and it's fair to say probably of antiquity. In our day, Plato is generally considered in the West as, like the supreme philosopher. Back in the Middle Ages, Aristotle culturally played that role, so it kind of ebbs and flows, goes from one to the other. Yeah, we have this idea about Plato being this fantastic philosopher, but we don't read him. We just have the idea that he's a great philosopher. But the fact is that in terms of our political discourse, our approach is essentially Platonic, in the sense that we do exactly what Plato does in the Republic, which is we try to understand political regimes. Ultimately, the problem we have is a problem of regime. It can certainly be usefully interpreted that way, understood that way, and and Plato's approach to understanding regimes is prescriptive. Okay, it's moral. Okay, it starts from a judgment that Plato already believes in. Okay, before writing his work. Okay, so in the Republic, when Plato presents, according to him, the 5 possible political regimes, from aristocracy to tyranny, he does so going from what he considers to be the best to worse. So the best is aristocracy, which actually is what we usually call, when talking about Plato, the realm of the philosopher kings. There is some discussion as to whether this, moniker is appropriate or not. And yes, okay, philosophy discussions are always possible, but it's essentially what he's talking about. I'll mention probably something on that in a second, but he starts with the best regime, according to him, which is aristocracy, so the realm of the best people, which is what Aristos means, and which is, according to him, when philosophers rule, or at least kings who are trained in philosophy. And then, so that's the best. And if you can't have that, well, second best is what he calls timocracy, which is when people are looking for honors, like laurel leaves and applause in the Senate and big titles and being loved by the public. I guess generally speaking. So anyway, according to Plato, that's second best. And eventually, according to him, that tends to devolve into oligarchy, which is when rich people take over, and then eventually the rich people do greedy things, and they abuse their power, so there's a popular revolt, so you end up with democracy, which does not mean what we think it means. It's essentially a form of mob rule, and so that's the fourth best, i.e. second to worst, second to last worst. So that's democracy, and eventually that devolves into tyranny because the mob is ends up getting manipulated by a despot, and so a tyrant takes power by manipulating, the throes of people, their emotions, and you end up with a tyrant on the throne, which is never good. No, everybody can agree on that throughout history. There are no good tyrannies. Okay, but so that's Plato, and so he goes from best to worst according to him. And the fact is that usually, certainly in the West, but I think probably from what I gather, for instance, in the former Soviet Union, I've seen some, comments that seem to be comparable there. What we usually do is we all have a preconceived idea of what the best regime is, and we do the same as Plato. Okay, and usually our best regime, by some astounding coincidence, is democracy, the one we live in. Obviously, it's the best one, right? And but what does it mean, democracy? Well, something. Okay, the people vote. That's what it means. Okay, so that's the best, and so we put that. And usually we would, traditionally, like certainly in North America, and certainly in the English parts of North America, which is most of it, they tend to place communism and fascism as the two radical evils, more or less on the same footing. So sometimes they put communism as a little less evil than fascism, and sometimes they put it as a little more evil. But usually they all agree that fascism and communism they're just evil. And again, what does communism mean and fascism mean? Well, it means whatever people say it means. And that's part of the problem. And ultimately, for that first methodology, that first approach to trying to understand political problems, if you look at discussions online or honestly on the news and magazines, newspapers, New York Times bestseller, political analysts, like everybody uses that approach. Okay, everybody starts from, well, we all know that democracy is this wonderful thing, but nobody defines it. Nobody takes the time to wonder what does it actually mean. Okay, they bundle, all rights and slavery. There was slavery. That was bad. That wasn't quite democratic. That's bad. And rights, but it's all super vague. It's all super vague. Okay, what gives that discourse, that type of quote-unquote analysis, the illusion of stability and solidity and intellectual value is that the strength people perceive is the solidity of preconceived ideas, preconceived judgments. Okay, mob rule in effect. Okay, doxa, so-called common sense. Okay, everybody knows that democracy is better than communism and obviously fascism. And why do we know this? Because everybody says it. And if you ask people, how do you actually know? Well, that's kind of like saying you're a fascist. Only a fascist would raise the question, obviously. And why? Because it is so self-evident that democracy is better. It is so self-evident that we don't even need to ask what democracy means, you see. And why? Because like Plato, we are starting with a moral preconceived judgment. We already know which is the best regime, so we don't need to think about it and describe it and ask questions, okay? That's irritating. That's counterproductive. We already know all that. Let's get to the good bit, okay? That good bit is, this is good, this is bad, this is worse, okay? And you will notice that people call each other, fascists and communists and socialists and all these things, or racist or whatever it is, like all the time. Everybody does it all the time. And what do any of these words mean? Well, we all know what they mean. And okay, but you will find that the actual definition of all these words is always not an actual definition, but we all know what it means. Okay. So there is no definition. There is no concept. There is the illusion of solidity, okay, based on habit, okay, based on social habit of getting, hit on the head with the sentence, democracy is good and communism is bad, okay? And this sentence is entirely ideological and has nothing to do with whether, actual democracy even exists, okay, or has existed in the last, 500 years, okay? And what's a better way, okay? And how do we tell that all that is unhealthy and a big mess generator? Well, we can tell it's a big mess generator because we're in a massive mess and people keep getting upset and throwing insults and saying, stupid things, convinced, like people are convinced and they feel the rage, and they feel the rage because they feel the problem. They see the problem in the world. And they can tell that things are wrong. And I'm sorry to say this, but right and left both perceive, they both perceive part of a problem, okay? They might not have a good way of understanding it, but what is it that motivates people on the left and people on the right, okay? It's an emotional response, okay? And that emotional response is based on something. And the problem is that people are always in the emotional response state, even when they believe, and especially when they believe they are in fact in the irrational, analysis mode, okay? And they never get to the rational analysis, and the situation keeps getting worse, okay? So what is the rational analysis? Okay. Well, the rational analysis doesn't exclude like an ethical judgment, certainly. Okay. It doesn't say everything is the same and everything is good. But the difference is it doesn't start with value judgment. Okay. It starts by asking itself, which is what Aristotle does. Okay. It starts by asking itself, okay, what is it exactly that I have in front of me? Okay. And if you've read Aristotle, which I strongly encourage because it's life-changing and a true gift to yourself, it's wonderful. Well, he's highly ethical. I mean, he has deeply ingrained values. Some of them we might agree with more than others, but he's certainly sincere and in good faith and well-meaning, and he doesn't shy away from all that. Okay, but again, he doesn't start with "I already know what's right and wrong, and I will base my entire analysis on that, and I will, put the facts in boxes that I have put together." Okay, according to my preconceived moral judgment, okay, which is what Plato did, okay, and label them rational, okay. So my emotional boxes coming from a preconceived non-rational judgment, okay, I will put a label on it that convinces me that I am being rational where I am not, okay. And again, rational, it just means using the tools of reason. does not mean better. Okay. It just means using the tools of reason. We say collectively reason is morally better, which is not a rational statement. Okay. Topic for another day, but you know. So all Aristotle is doing, what he's doing in his political analysis, his methodology is, okay, let's look at what we have, what's the data, and let's see what categories, what are the simplest categories and most useful categories we can use to put our different regimes in boxes or folders, if you like, and see if we can make sense of it. Okay, and I use the word categories. Just a side note, that word has a very specific meaning in Aristotle's work, and I'm not using it with that meaning here today. I'm just using it in the general everyday sense. Okay, so categories in common modern parlance, not in the Aristotelian logic sense. Okay, so anyway, what are those three boxes or three categories? Okay, what is this methodology? What makes it rational? Well, so Aristotle looks at regimes, okay, the political regimes, all the political regimes that have ever existed, really. And he basically figures out that, okay, well, you always have one or three cases, and it's based on the number of people who rule. Okay, if you have certain regimes where a single person is in charge. And you have a series of regimes where a small group is in charge, and you have a third and last category of regimes where the general public is in charge. Okay, so usually the small group, it's mostly the rich people, and when the large group is in charge, it's everybody except the small group of rich and powerful people. Okay, so the rich people. Okay, he also, contrary to Plato, he gives a pretty simple explanation of what ruling means, and ruling means the person or persons who write the laws and who make sure that the laws are followed and executed. Okay, so that is his grid. Okay, so he says, okay, so we will look at the people in a state or a tribe or a collectivity. We will look at who gets to write the laws and to make sure they are applied. Okay, who has final say on that? And if it's a single person, we will call that a monarchy. So we have a king, monarchy, single person rules. Okay. If it's a small group, usually the rich people, not always, but usually, then we will call that aristocracy. And if it's the general public, okay, who gets to have the final say on writing the laws and applying them, then I think the term constitutional regime or something like that. Okay. So that's the three basic categories Aristotle uses in his methodology. And as you can see, it's really very factual. There's no judgment at all at this stage. Okay, so are there laws? Okay, is there a group of people living together, like a state or city? Yes. Okay. Do they have laws where usually they do? Okay. So, and who gets to write them and to apply them? Okay. So, and he looks at that, and usually there's always a person or a group of people, and he has three categories based on that: single person, monarchy; small group, aristocracy; and large group of common folk, which he calls constitutional regime. Okay. So the second stage is, are the laws being respected by the rulers themselves? Okay. And he uses that to determine whether the regime is corrupt or healthy. So if you have a king, for instance, is he using his great power to amass, massive riches just for himself, and to have orgies, which is very frequent? Okay. Okay, rulers who get absolute power, certainly throughout history, they have tended to devolve into the worst type of debauchery you can imagine. It's very frequent. So yeah, and usually those monarchs who they when they go bad and when they break bad, to coin a term, they don't respect their own laws. They govern by whim and arbitrary, decisions and terror and vindictiveness. So when you have that, you have a tyrant. Okay, so who is like the dark side of the king. Okay, so a despot or a tyrant. An aristocracy, you have exactly the same thing, but it's called an oligarchy. So if you have a small group of people who rule wisely, and you can tell they rule wisely because they respect their own laws. Okay, they are not there to enrich themselves. Okay, they write the laws for the benefit of all, ultimately, and certainly they're not there just to put money in their pockets and palatial estates and anyway, you get the idea. So if they are well behaved and they respect their own laws, you have an aristocracy. But quite often they don't do that, and when they don't do that, generally speaking, it's because they're rich people trying to get richer, and they use all the nefarious means that power affords them, and it's generally horrible, and that is what we call oligarchy. And again, we recognize it because the laws, there's one law, a set of laws for the rich and one for the poor. And in fact, even the laws for the rich only apply when it's, convenient. Okay. The fact is that a corrupt regime has written laws, but because they are not respected and they are applied arbitrarily or depending on the interest of the ruling class, okay? The real laws are the unwritten laws, okay? And the unwritten law is it good for the rich people or not? And if it is good for the rich people in an oligarchy, that's the way it goes, okay? But, if you're a poor person or not an oligarch in an oligarchy, well, you better follow every single rule, okay? Which many of which are there precisely to be used against you should it be needed to find a pretext. Like this is very frequent. Anyway, and the third, like the equivalent of that for a constitutional regime where the majority of people rule, that is democracy. So mob rule again, and which is pretty much in this case what Plato says. And which is a strange concept for us. We're not used to that. We haven't seen that in quite a long time, long enough, in fact, that it seems totally alien to our way of thinking. There are echoes of that, like in fiction, like in the Batman movie, the third one, Dark Knight Rises Again, I think it's called. There's like essentially the riot that takes control of New York or Gotham City, I guess. That would be a form of that, I guess. But in antiquity, it happened more. It was something that was seen from time to time. There were states that devolved into that form of, again, mob rule, like tyranny of the masses. That's Aristotle's grid, okay? Whether it applies to specific regimes, like in history, like the French Commune, that's completely, okay, we need to use that grid and go see what actually happened, etc. But the idea here is that we have this, again, this very simple grid. Who's in charge? One person, small group, and majority of the people. And in charge means who gets to actually write the laws and make sure they are applied. And so that's category one. And second is, do the rulers follow their own rules or not? And if they don't, it is a corrupt regime, either tyranny, oligarchy, or what the Greeks called democracy. Finally, the final, possible category or tool that Aristotle uses in his grid is the regime pretending to be something else? So, for instance, you might have a king, okay, and the king is nominally in charge, and everybody bows down to the king, but everybody knows that in reality, it's a completely different regime. Like the laws say the king is in charge and the courts work this way and that way, but in reality, like the general is in charge and his coterie is in charge and the actual rules are different. Something like that. Okay, like that one requires a bit more judgment because there is an evaluation, like a personal evaluation that needs to happen for that third criteria. Is the regime actually what it says it is? But again, it's pretty simple because you just need to look around and, okay, no matter what the regime says or pretends it is or says it is on paper, who is actually in charge? And are these people respectful of the laws, or do they ignore them and apply them whenever, only in cases where it suits them, especially if they do so punitively, So what regime are we in now? I've mentioned this in other videos, but okay, so first of all, a quick thing. You will observe that using this grid, what's fascinating is that the three main political regimes of the modern era, which is to say democracy and communism and fascism, they are straight away directly, it's very easy to assign them to a column in Aristotle's grid, right? Fascism obviously is either monarchy or tyranny. It's in principle, it's a single person rule, okay? And in practicality, it's basically always that. They're either a form of monarchy or tyranny, and according to Aristotle's grid, we would need to check if they follow their own laws or not, okay, to judge whether they are corrupt or not, okay. And just to reassure you, the most famous fascist regime in history did not respect their own laws. So there, they were corrupt. Okay. Like communism, they were actually a form of aristocracy, really, because who was in charge? They said it was the people, but it was the party. It was the Communist Party and the Politburo, and so it was the officials. It was a small group of the officials, okay, who had the power. So really, they're a modern aristocracy. They're the aristocracy of the industrial age. Is what communism is, what we call communism. Democracy, like modern democracy, that's an interesting one because it's either a constitutional republic, a regime, okay, so where the majority rule, or an aristocracy, okay, because the people who actually govern tend to be like the elected officials, and the elected officials rule as representatives of the people, but just how much actual effect the actual will of the people has on political decisions, well, that depends on the country. That depends on the actual individual regime, like the as it is applied in a democratic Western society. Like it's different in France and England and so forth. And it also depends on the time period. Okay, so all these things matter. If we were to go look at each of the political regimes in from the start of the Industrial Revolution, for instance, like of the modern age, okay, the industrial age, we would find that it's actually super easy to put whatever the regime is in one of those categories, okay. And again, like the Paris Commune would be super interesting because, okay, did they have laws or not? Okay, how did they actually govern themselves? So that would be like a very interesting question. Okay, but like the anarchists in Spain, like in 1936, I think. Well, they had institutions. They might have been anarchists, but they had ways of making collective decisions. That would be the kind of question we need to ask. But we would always usually be able to either say it's one of the three columns, one of the three types of regimes Aristotle talks about, and they either follow their own laws or not. So it tells us if it's corrupt or not. When we have a problem, it's usually because it's pretending to be something else. Okay, like North Korea. Okay, it's pretending to be a communist regime, so this form of workers. A regime based on the rule of the workers is the idea of communism, at least ideologically. But obviously, North Korea, there's none of that. Like, he's a tyrant. He does whatever he wants, the guy, okay? So yeah, it's in real life, it's a tyranny, okay? So what do we have in the West? Well, who's really in charge? Okay. Is there anyone who thinks it's not rich people? Is there a single person in the West and probably in the world who does not immediately respond when asked who's in charge in the West? A single person who will respond, no, it's not the rich people in real life. Okay, and so yeah, it's the rich people, okay, and not rich like your doctor friend who has a big house. Rich like has a vacation island in the Caribbean with cameras everywhere. That type of rich, okay. And I think these rich people, do they follow the laws? Do they? What exactly does happen on those islands? Okay, or anywhere, like what rule? Like if a billionaire commits whatever crime it is, speeding ticket or whatever. Okay, when is that billionaire ever punished? When is the law ever applied to the billionaire? Well, usually when they need to make an example because the people are getting unruly. That's when. Because the rest of the time, they never follow their own the laws. They don't pay taxes. They don't, they don't pay speeding tickets, university applications. If you're rich, you just get in. You just get to pay $1 billion or $1 million, whatever. Build a new wing to the university. You get in. So you get my point, right? Whereas, poor people, like people from people will get sentenced to 30 years in jail for a small packet of some drug or other, okay? Sent to essentially life in torture conditions, really, if you look at what life in prison really is for poor people. If you're a billionaire, you have your own set of rules. Again, which is quite easy to observe just by reading the headlines. That's all there is to it. Okay, we're so used to think about the preconceived value judgment of democracy must be better, and because it's ideological, we don't notice that the idea that democracy is better, which we repeat all day, every day, is based on a narrative, okay, a good versus evil narrative, where the fascists and the communists are the evil, okay, and what is that narrative based on multiplying and amplifying everything bad that quite often they did do. I mean, quite like many instances, they didn't make stuff up, they usually didn't need to, but sometimes they did. But usually they don't need to. But there is a lot of strategic minimizing of just how much the West, so-called, or democracy, so-called, have always done exactly the same thing. You know, if you try to make two columns of the crimes of the fascist regimes, okay, put all the crimes of fascist regimes in one column, and put all the crimes of the communist regimes in the same column. Okay, just put in your Excel spreadsheet of evil, and start listing all the crimes that were committed by democracies, and you will find that both columns are pretty identical. There's not a lot of difference. And we fail to recognize that fact because we have ingrained in us the idea that our regime must be better, because we just choose to believe it because it's the narrative. Okay. And my own personal opinion is that I would prefer to live in a democracy, an actual democracy. I think it's better. I do think it's better. Okay. But it's not what we have at all. What we have is an oligarchy. And we've had an oligarchy for decades. Okay. And just how much an actual republic the Western democracies were, you know, when they started, like in the 19th century, that's up for a debate. It's another discussion. I don't think it was entirely cynical. I don't think it was entirely honest either. It's a bit of both, but that is beside the point, because right now what we have isn't the rise of fascism or something like that. Okay, what we have is an oligarchy that is devolving in the way that all oligarchies do, which is what we have now. And yes, sometimes that turns into tyranny, and usually once a regime is in outright like oligarchy, once it has devolved sufficiently to be an actual oligarchy, it tends to oscillate between tyranny and oligarchy, because, you know, okay, a small group will take over, and then a strong man will take over, and kind of, you know, balances like that, goes back and forth. But small difference as far as most people are concerned. Same difference, you know, whether it's a huge, massive crook or a small bunch of crooks doing horrible things. But yeah, all that's going on right now. Okay, once you just take the grid, and okay, who's in charge? Are the people who's actually in charge, and are the laws being followed? Well, here we say it's the people, but it's obviously not. Okay. Yeah, we can protest the massive data centers that are being built, or the fracking, you know, that destroys drinking water or whatever, you know. And you can have demonstrations, the wars still happen, you can, you know, have sit-ins, and data centers still get built and whatever. Okay. And when they stop the project, usually they will just try again a year from now. It's usually what happens, right? The will of the power in this regime is essentially never followed. Okay. So you have groups that manipulate the resentment and the frustrations and the ideals of the population. But who's in charge? Well, you know, the oligarchs are in charge. And you can tell because the rules, the laws don't apply to them, and they keep getting richer and richer, and everything is falling apart. That's it. So obviously we can condemn it, but you see the trick to just understand what's going on is that, you know, you get better results, but just being objective, not in the sense of forgetting what you believe, but not using what you believe as an analytical tool, because it can't do that. Okay. So you just put your judgment on pause just for a second. It's still there, but you just use your reason to say, okay, can I understand the situation in front of me, like factually, with no judgment, which is what Aristotle did. Okay, and this is the grid. This is what we have. And yeah, okay, and now I have better tools to understand why it's so awful, and from there, perhaps, you know, with other people, certainly try to figure out what sort of solutions might be, you know, okay, what is it? What can we do? But at least we're starting from more solid, you know, ground. So that's basically it. So we're living in oligarchy, according to Aristotle, and according to me. And when you see that, you realize that it's happened before, and none of this is surprising. And as to what we'll do next, well, I don't know. But I don't know. I don't know. We'll see. I'm hopeful. Anyway, I have a Patreon if you want to support my work. For those who do, you're the greatest. Evan, Carl, Wallace, Dominique. Anyway, take care. See you soon. Live long and prosper. All that good stuff.